Call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, December 19, 2019. All managers are present except Manager Hejmati and Manager Rognes and Manager Maxwell, though a couple of them will join us shortly. Manager Rognes. We've come to, there's no member of the public, so we'll move to approval of the agenda. Mr. Smith.
Madam President, I would ask that we add under action items, I guess as item 11.5, the vacation and sick leave schedule for the administrator.
All right, that is added. Any other changes? Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Note that there is a memo from Ms. Christopher about the watershed-based implementation funding program in our agenda packet as an information item. And on the consent agenda, we have approval of the December 3rd, 2019 board minutes, approval of the check registers, general checking account, surety checking account, wire transfers, and 3 resolutions. 19103, authorization to purchase water monitoring equipment. 104, selection and authorization to contract for engineering services. And 105, approval of the 2020 meeting calendar. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move approval, and I just want to make a comment.
One moment. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Manager Olson. Go ahead.
If you just take notice of the wire transfers, they're transferring money from our existing bank to our new bank, and that's what accounts for the large wire.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Since it's the last meeting of the year, I've been reflecting on our accomplishments of the year and thought I would say a few words. I sat down and thought that I would, give some examples, but I realized I could talk for 3 hours or I could, miss something. And so I just want to say that we've made victories in all aspects of our work. We came in with a flat budget. We have some new managers, some new staff. I'm really proud of all we've accomplished, and it's so nice to be a part of the team of board and staff and consultants and CAC and just keep working toward our vision. We do good work.
Well, I just want to make a comment.
Yes.
I think that your leadership has provided a lot of stability and direction, I, for one, really appreciate the hard work that you put in as president.
Thanks, Dick.
Here, here.
Manager Olson and I attended the MAUD annual meeting, and we will divide the report. I will mention that during the business meeting, the members acted on the resolutions as recommended by the committee in all cases, although in one instance, there was about a third of the membership would like to have put support behind laws that would govern the speed of wake boats and how close they could come to shore because of the erosion problem. That did not pass, but it was mentioned in another conversation I had since then, so it's an idea that's floating around out there. I was reelected to the MAUD board and reelected as treasurer. I also, one last point is that the attendance set a record. Over 600 people registered. That includes the members and the staff and exhibitors and presenters. But that was a really good turnout, and then we sort of maxed out the space at Arrowwood, so they might look for a new place. Manager Olson.
And in that standing room only room, you went through a detailed report on the budget to the penny, and they unanimously approved it. So.
That's true. I was told later I didn't need to have so much detail.
But it's still, everybody accepted it. And we also had James and Lewis talk to the crowd about the balanced urban ecology approach that we use and the steps and projects, the examples of the steps we used in the urban corridor and the partnerships with Methodist and Japs Olson. We also had Tiffany Schaffler present the story of the dam operations and how we've partnered with the weather folks and do predictive control of the dam, and then the folks that are downstream don't have the frequent flooding that they could have had in the wettest year this year. So that was a very successful effort, and it was very well received. There were just an enormous number of people that went up after that talk to say, okay, now let's talk about how you do this, because a lot of them have flooding control requirements that they're facing with, and the idea that they can do predictive control and let water out and build storage was a very popular subject. So a great job to everybody for their talks.
Thank you. Policy and Planning Committee meeting report, Manager Miller.
We had a very good discussion on the strategic communication realignment, and we're well on our way to develop a plan. It's being modified as we go, with a lot of input from the CAC and the staff and really lively input from the board. So I think we're going to see a good plan developed out of this.
Thank you. Manager Rodman, CAC.
Well, it was exactly the same conversation at that level. And I was really impressed with the people that are on that committee. They've just really understand our mission and vision, and I think are probably very, very good ambassadors to the community that we serve.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
That's great. On your desk is a list of the Citizens Advisory Committee Board Liaison assignments for 2020. And I asked Deb Johnson, when she put it together, to carry it over as a tentative for the next 2 months so that you can see the rhythm of it, that we're just rotating, following the same rotation. So I would like a motion to approve this liaison assignment.
So moved.
Manager Hejmati, thank you. Would you second, Manager Olson?
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And of course, if you need to switch up, just call somebody else and switch up. The upcoming meeting and event schedule is in the agenda, noting that Manager Olson will be at CSC in January, and Manager Hejmati will be at Metro Mod in January also. We will now move to the permits, item 10.1, permit 19661. Ms. Quinn.
Thank you, President White, Board Managers. I'm going to move this real close. I have a little bit of a head cold.
Oh, okay.
All right. So good evening, President White, Board of Managers. This evening, permit 19-661 is before you to keep with the board policy that the district's projects come before the board for consideration of approval. And because the applicant, which is the district, has requested an exception from full compliance with the buffer provisions of the wetland protection rule for the Wasserman Park project. I would like to note that the project will be completed in 2 phases. And so to provide clarity for the board this evening, before you for consideration is exception to section 6C of the wetland protection rule for the whole project, so for phase 1 and 2. Consideration of the approval of the permit for phase 1, and then consideration to delegate approval of authority to the district administrator for phase 2, on the condition that there's no expansion to the exception requested. So this evening I will go through a project overview, the rule analysis, the exception request, and then conclude with a staff recommendation. So the Wasserman Park project is located within the 6 Mile Creek Halsted Bay subwatershed. It is located on the west side of Wasserman Lake in the city of Victoria. The existing condition of the site is currently undeveloped, except for there's an existing road to access the site. There are also 3 wetlands located on the site and a stream. And for the purposes of the permit report and this presentation, this larger wetland complex here is referred to as Wetland 1, which is a DNR public waters wetland. This one down here is referred to as Wetland 2, and then Wetland 3 is fringe along the stream here. So the proposed conditions for Phase 1 would be the installation of a boardwalk located here, and then a small boardwalk located here as well that will connect to the future fishing pier, which was proposed with Phase 2. And then the rest of Phase 2 will be the nature-based park. So kind of focusing in on the proposed boardwalks with Phase 1. As I mentioned, there are 2 boardwalks proposed. So trying to line this up here where the abutments are. So the first boardwalk will cross here, and then the second boardwalk will be a smaller segment located here. So both of the boardwalks are crossing over the DNR Public Waters wetland, and they will be installed within the 100-year floodplain of Wasserman Lake. So the project triggers the district's water body crossings and floodplain alteration, as well as the wetland protection rules. For the purposes of the presentation, I'm not going to go into as much detail for each of the rule provisions as provided in the permit report, but we'll provide a high-level summary. So the applicant has submitted plans and calculations that demonstrate conformance with the district's water body crossings and structures and floodplain alteration rules. What may be of interest to the board, as outlined in the permit report, is that the boardwalks meet a public benefit. They are the minimal impact solution for crossing a wetland, and they will not increase the flood stage of Wasserman Lake. There are no wetland impacts proposed with the project. However, the district's wetland protection rule, the buffer provisions are required whenever there is a disturbance to a wetland, and then also when the water body crossings and structures rule is triggered. The boardwalk crossing over the wetland, while it won't be an impact, could be defined as a disturbance in its strictest sense, and therefore a wetland buffer is required around the entirety of Wetland 1. And the applicant has requested an exception under the criteria for allowable averaging to the wetland protection rule. So moving into the exception analysis, this is the overall buffer plan that the applicant has submitted for both Phase 1 and Phase 2. The reason why the overall plan is being considered is because future improvements to the existing road here, the stormwater filtration BMP here, and a series of trails throughout the project that are proposed with Phase 2 will limit the minimum buffer width that will be provided around Wetland 1, and then also a small segment around Wetland 2. So staff have reviewed the exception and application materials submitted and have found that there are 6 segments where the minimum buffer width requirement for Wetland 1 is not met, and 1 segment for Wetland 2. And I'm going to kind of walk through those visually. So according to the district's functional assessment of wetlands, Wetland 1 is a preserved wetland, which would require a minimum buffer width of 37.5 feet. And those 6 segments where there's a shortfall are located here, where there's an approximate average of a 10-foot shortfall. This segment here, which has a shortfall average of 4.5 feet. Here, where the shortfall is approximately 15.75 feet. The location up here, where you have a shortfall of about 10 feet. This long segment here, where the shortfall is approximately 15 feet. And then up on the island area, where there's a shortfall of about 15.5 feet. And then the small section on Wetland 2 is located here, where there's a shortfall of about 5.25 foot. And so this slide just re-summarizes that information that I just walked through. I think kind of the main things to point on here is that based on those shortfalls, staff has run some calculations and determined that the area the total area where the minimum buffer width is not being met for the project is about 0.34 acres for wetland 1. And that also there is a shortfall in the total buffer area provided of 0.54 acres. And then for wetland 2, the area where the minimum is not met is about 79 square feet. So just to briefly remind the board that in order for the board to consider that an application meets the exception criteria, the applicant must demonstrate that the project achieves a greater natural resource benefit than strict compliance with the rule. And then I also would like to just remind the board what the policy of the wetland protection rule is. So to achieve no net loss in wetlands, to increase wetlands quantity, quality, and biological diversity. So the overall plan for both Phase 1 and Phase 2 for the nature-based park will involve a lot of site restoration. So everything you see on here that has a hatch mark on it is proposed to be native planting. And could be is summarized as the restoration will include about 1.5 acres of prairie restoration, a little over 1.5 acres of oak savanna restoration, 2.14 acres of wetland restoration, over 350 feet of stream channel restoration, and the project is also proposing to treat some of the additional linear impervious surface that would be exempted under the district's requirements. So staff and district engineer have reviewed the plans that have been submitted and have determined that the 2.14 acres of wetland restoration shown in green here, the 370 feet of stream restoration, which equates to about 0.33 acre area of restoration, and the overtreatment of 0.13 acres of impervious surface here exceed the district's regulatory requirements. And if you equate that all together, the project overall will result in about 2.6 acres of natural resource improvement that won't be required by regulation. So based on that information, staff and the district engineer have determined that the applicant has submitted sufficient evidence for the board to consider the exception for providing the 2.6 acres of natural resource benefit that exceeds regulation, being a better benefit than the shortfall for the about 0.34 area where the minimum buffer width requirement is not met, and the 0.45 acre shortfall of total buffer area provided. So in conclusion, just to recap, staff and the district engineer find that there's been sufficient evidence provided for the board to consider the exception to Section 6C of the Wetland Protection Rule for both Phase 1 and 2. Upon that approval, staff recommend that the permit for Phase 1 of the Boardwalks, 19-661, be approved with the conditions listed in the permit report, and that the Board of Managers delegate approval authority to the district administrator for Phase 2 of the project on the condition that there is no expansion to the exception requested before you tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn. Is there a motion to approve the exception?
Move approval.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus, are there questions or comments on the exception?
Yeah, I don't feel comfortable delegating authority to the administrator for Phase 2. You know, we're granting the permit to ourselves, and I think any changes to this should be in public record.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Anything about exception, the exception? You okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay, any questions about that? Mr. Smith?
Madam President, managers, I just wanted to note for the record, Ms. Quinn has really outlined a fairly detailed analysis of the offsetting natural resource restoration improvements. The permit report, I believe, makes a reference also to a past alum treatment that the district undertook in the vicinity of the project. And I think that is a part of the broad context of where all of this work is taking place. But we believe, for purposes of your consideration of the exception, strictly speaking, that past project shouldn't be a consideration. Should really focus just on this permit application and all the different measures that are proposed that staff has identified as offsetting benefits in light of the loss of the buffer,
And sufficient in themselves
without reference to that.
anything else? Those in favor of granting the exception to parts 1 and 2, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Now, is there a motion to approve phase 1 with the conditions stated?
So moved.
Motion by Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rodness, any questions for Ms. Quinn? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Is there a motion to delegate authority to approve to the district administrator for phase 2 with the conditions stated? No motion? Fails for lack of a motion. So we will see this back in front of us when we get to phase 2. Thank you.
Thank you.
I keep track of these staff.
You could, like belling the cat, is that kind of keeping track? Also, Wasserman Park, the next item. We have Resolution 19106, the 90% plan, etc. Ms. Brown. I know you'll say it, so I don't have to say it.
Oh, I was hoping you would say it. Okay, thank you, President White and managers. So the action before you tonight is approval of the 90% design plans for Wasserman Lake Park and authorization to solicit bids. We're also seeking approval of the operations and maintenance plan. And finally, we're seeking to award contracts for Boardwalk construction as well as for the winter oak work portion of the project. And before I get started, I just wanted to point out to the board that one of our neighbors on the site is in the audience this evening. So we have quite a lot to get through this evening. So I'm going to start with a brief project background, and then I'll run through the design and operations and maintenance plan. Then we'll review the contracts. I'll provide an overall budget summary for where we are with the project, and then move into the action items requested. So as the board is well aware, we've been working on this project since February of 2017, when the board approved a purchase agreement for the Wasserman West site, which was contingent upon the development of a cooperative agreement with the City of Victoria. In May of 17, we approved the first cooperative agreement, which outlined the shared goal of developing a concept plan and shared strategy for implementing this park plan, as well as developed a purchase agreement wherein the city would eventually acquire the property from the district, and also outlined what the sort of financial responsibilities would be in implementing the park. In June of 2018, we completed kind of the first phase of design work with the City of Victoria. And then in May of 2019, we approved the second phase cooperative agreement, which has really propelled us through all of the work that's been completed and before you in the last 6 months. In August 29th of this year, we awarded a contract to Ane Fernandez Landscape Architects after a competitive RFP process for final design and construction oversight. And since then, we've been working really hastily to move through final design with the goal in mind of construction in 2020 for this park. The sort of public process that this has entailed included a preliminary design review with Victoria Parks and Recreation Committee, which is a citizen committee, a public open house in early October. Both board and council saw preliminary design in early October, And then about a month later, we came forward with the 60% design approval. And then at that time, we also sought authorization to bid the boardwalk portion to advance that work for winter construction. In November, the City Council had a discussion about park finance and made the determination that they would self-finance, so wouldn't use the Carver County Finance Program to fund the park. And then on December 9th, they made a similar decision that we're asking you to make this evening in awarding the boardwalk construction and then approving the 90% plans for the park. So now I'm going to run through the concept design. I'll keep it pretty high level because virtually nothing has changed since that 60% design review, but where it has changed, I will kind of point out what's been modified or added. The board is well aware of our access and parking, so we'll be accessing the site off of County Road 43. As Heidi just detailed, an exception was required to get that road through that narrow buffer area to get into the site. One modification has been a slight reduction in the number of parking spaces. That was something that the public had requested and also sort of facilitated some of the cost management on the site. So the number there has been reduced to 26, though the parking lot could be expanded in the future if demand requires. And then we heard from residents concerns about sort of screening and sight lines on the parking, and that's been managed through a robust planting plan, creating a buffer between those homes and the parking area, as well as some site grading that kind of sinks the parking lot a little lower than the adjacent berm, as well as the prairie mound. The shelter really hasn't changed. It is still sort of a simple but dynamic design that's really positioned to kind of leverage the site views and look out over Lake Wasserman, sort of the jewel of the park here. One slight modification is a reduction in the overall bituminous area in that plaza area, and it's been replaced with some formal planting as well as turf grass. And then I also wanted to highlight kind of, I guess, one of the highlights of this plaza area, which will be the fire pit gathering area that'll be operated and managed by the city. This park will feature the city's first nature play area, located, there's sort of the larger gross motor play area will be located right adjacent to the shelter. This is a drawing from our site plans here. So this is our shelter plaza area. The children's nature play is primarily right here. And then there's also a culvert kind of crawl through feature. And then what we're calling a log scramble that comes up and over the hill here, kind of tying into the overall trail plan for that prairie mound. An illustration of what this looks like. This is the sort of loose parts area, which is in a separate area down in the Oak Savanna. And then kind of the main play area will have that crawl through culvert, materials salvaged on site being reused for play. And then this is sort of what the log scramble feature looks like.
Can I just make a comment? I brought my granddaughters out to the Arboretum, and they got something similar to that. Mm-hmm. It's really a mess. But, you know, we obviously don't have anything to say about it. You know, it's a city deal, but I think it's oversold, and you know, the kids spread the things all around, and people take them home, and everything else. It looks good in the picture there, but 20 minutes after the kids hit it, there won't be anything left.
Sure. Manager Miller, both the log scramble and then this sort of gross motor area, everything will be secured into the ground. And then the operations and maintenance plan does try to control for some of that. These materials can be easily replaced, and we also specify that they'll be removed in the winter, so that should help a little bit with the wear and tear.
Could they be removed to the fire pit pretty quick?
Yeah. Yeah. The older kids will do that.
Sorry.
We did intentionally not have any loose parts in the area that's closer to the fire pit, but I've learned a lot about human nature through designing a park, learning about kind of all the risk points, so we shall see.
Okay.
Another major feature is that lake access and boardwalk. So the site will feature a multi-use dock off of the island feature, which is accessed through the 460 feet of boardwalk, which is a modified design from our standard design to help with long-term operations and maintenance and wear and tear. It's designed to be a little bit more resilient than our standard boardwalk design. We will get into sort of the contract recommendation for the boardwalk portion. But one thing to note here is that because the boardwalk bids came back so favorably, we are looking to add a small additional area of boardwalk to sort of tie into that floating dock. So we'll be looking to Pember, the recommended contractor, to also build boardwalk from sort of the upland area to the OHW, and then it will tie into a floating dock there. And so we'll look at that when we go through the contract there. And then here's just an image of that, a similar, though not exactly same, kind of modified boardwalk design. The original restoration sort of proposal was kind of represented in the easement to be focused in sort of the wetland fringe areas as well as the stream channel, which is shown in D here. And then the wetland fringe is the C area. Through design, we've also kind of extended the restoration goals to include the prairie mound restoration, as well as what's really become kind of a signature of the site, which is the oak savanna restoration through this peninsula area here featured in B. And these are the areas that the district will be making its investment. The stream channel restoration involves some earthwork, and then we'll also be looking to put in these kind of rock riffle structures to create some kind of stop points within the creek and mimic some of the natural conditions that we're seeing in the creek at present. The easement for the site, as originally conceived of, encompasses the wetland and stream channel area. As the board is aware, that's sort of been modified through design, and our area of investment has shifted into some of the upland natural areas. So in order to accommodate this shift, we're proposing a slight change to the easement such that it will provide, oops, wrong direction. It will provide for some access and maintenance into those natural areas. So this is just a hand-drawn sketch of where those natural areas will be expanded to within the easement document. There's an additional modification proposed to the easement that's unrelated to the sort of maintenance factor, but came at the request of the county. They are looking in the future to expand County Road 43, and with that would be requesting some additional right-of-way to the tune of about 30 additional feet along the wetland edge here. And they have requested that we not encumber that in conservation easement so that they could eventually extend their right-of-way. It's not an area that the district had intended to invest, and the area that they're talking about is all along sort of steep slope. So there isn't a particular risk or opportunity associated with providing that to the county. But I'll take the board's direction on whether or not we'd like to make that modification. If there are no issues with those two easement modifications, either way, this would be coming to the board on January 9th. If there are no concerns, I would put it on consent, but if we'd like to have more discussion, I can facilitate that on the 9th. And then, so the easement kind of provides the legal framework around which we can access and manage the site. There also is an operations and maintenance plan provided in your packet, and also a requirement of the cooperative agreement, which just establishes shared responsibility expectations around maintenance on site for both parties. So it encompasses things like the nature play or even shelter maintenance on behalf of the city, and then for the district, details how we'll maintain vegetation in the easement and natural areas. And within those areas, the management and maintenance, once we reach the end of the warranty period, would be turned over to our PMLM department, Planning, Maintenance, and Land Management. So that's the design and operations and maintenance plan. So now I'll go into the sort of contract awards that we're looking to do this evening. So at the November 7th meeting, we discussed these two early bid packages, one being the winter oak work, which we discussed and then solicited quotes through our sort of standard vegetation quote process. And then the other being the boardwalk, which the board approved 90% design, and then we solicited bids for. So just to refresh for the winter oak work, this entails some pruning as well as select removals where oaks are sort of crowding other oaks, primarily in that woodland restoration area in the oak savanna area. All of the oak materials on site will be salvaged for the play features, as well as to an extent in the cordwood walls. And going into this quote process, our cost estimate was $36,000 or about $37,000 for pruning and removal, and then about $9,500 for salvage. So we solicited from 7 companies, but only received 2 responses. Those were from Landbridge Ecological and Bakenland, Landbridge Ecological being the low quote. You'll note that it is about $10,000 higher than what our cost estimate was. And what that comes down to, one is that when we developed the cost estimate, we didn't have the number of trees being removed developed. So it somewhat reflects an outdated cost estimate from an earlier phase. But then another one was that we didn't fully understand the extent of some of the subcontractor work, where their amount of time needed on the project about doubled from what we had expected. So it is more than we had anticipated from an overall cost standpoint, though it still is within range in terms of our cost allocation. We're still about where we expected to be. And so with that cost allocation, the district is paying for pruning and then half of the tree removal cost. And then the city is responsible for the salvage and the other half of the removal. On the boardwalk, again, we discussed sort of the design features of this. The boardwalk bid package also included some island tree removal because that's sort of limited accessibility. We wouldn't have been able to do that tree removal in the summer or fall. The estimated cost for the boardwalk construction was $385,000, and the tree removal was expected to be an additional $17,000. Excuse me. So we solicited bids on Quest CDN, and then also reached out to some of our preferred contractors, and received 10 bids in response, with Pember being the low bid at $229,200, so significantly under the cost estimate. And the allocation there, you can see, was about 214 or $214,000 for boardwalk, $14,000 for tree removal. As I mentioned before, there are some recommended additions and contingencies. One being that additional piece of the lake access for $32,800. And then the other one is that we're planning for probably more contingency than would be typical because there's some question about what the ultimate depth of the helical installation is going to be. This is something that we anticipated going into the bid process and manage that by requesting an additional per lineal foot cost for the helical pier, so we have a good sense of kind of, where those costs can land. And so the contingency, even with the contingency, we're still kind of well below the overall cost estimate. And then the allocation for this piece of the project is the district is paying for half the tree removal, and then all of the other costs are allocated to the city. So where this puts us sort of collectively with the contract approvals and then the overall park design being at 90%. Again, the boardwalk, if we include all of the contingency as well as the additional pier installation, is about $300,590. And then the park project as a whole for capital costs only would be $2,066,062 for a total park construction cost of $2,366,652. The district's restoration estimate, including again the contract award this evening, would be right under our $300,000 estimate. We did bring this to both the discussion about park finance with the city, as well as this was in their contract approval, and they are comfortable sort of with up to $2.65 million, including their construction contingency. So we're still in sort of a comfort zone for the city in terms of their cost allocation. And so then, in terms of what's next with this project, again, I'll be bringing the final purchase agreement and easement back to the board on January 9th, and we'll seek some direction on kind of if there are any concerns about those easement modifications. We'll also bring to committee a discussion about the interpretive plan for the site, which we have been meeting with our designers about, and it'll take our sort of signage and interpretation plan in a slightly different direction than what we've seen on other sites in the district. So we'll be looking for some feedback on that approach on the 9th. And then we'll be looking to bring the construction contract for the park as a whole back to the board in mid-February of 2020. So with that, again, these are the action items this evening: the approval of the 90% design plans and authorization to solicit bids, the approval of the operations and maintenance plan, and then authorization to execute both the contract with Pember Companies for the boardwalk portion of the project, as well as Landbridge Ecological for the winter oak work. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 19-106?
Move approval.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus. Are there any questions for Ms. Brown?
The island tree removal, is there island planting or is it just tree removal?
Manager Olson, managers, there will be planting with the rest of the park project as well. At this point, it's just tree removal, and when you do those tree removals in the winter, there isn't that much secondary impact, but there will be some planting as part of the overall site plan.
Okay, and is most of that, as I understand, ash?
Yes, a lot of the island is ash. And we've taken kind of a more conservative approach to ash on the island because it makes up such a big portion of the canopy, so it won't be full ash removal on the island.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? How do you know when the helical piles are deep enough?
President White, managers, I actually don't know the answer to that.
Mr. Meehan?
Well,
Oh, Mr. Heyman, I'm sorry.
President White,
Please, let's get both and we'll compare them.
I was excited, Hammond got excited. So what they'll do is there's a screw that goes into the ground. Essentially, when they get to a resistance level, that's when they'll stop. So they have a meter on top, and as they twist it down, it'll get, I can't remember the exact torque number that's on. It's usually like 2,000 pounds. When they get to that point, they stop going down. So usually it's a friction with the vehicle goes. They get to that point, that's when they'll stop.
Thank you. Do you agree with him, Mr. Heyman?
I didn't know that, I just wanted to give Chris an opportunity.
Yes, I knew that, I knew that. And what's involved in this, in the salvage?
President White managers, it's primarily really sort of detailed specifications on the cutting. Anya Fernandez has really gone out and identified tree for tree what is being salvaged where. For the purposes of this work, we're providing specifics for cutting and stockpiling, and then it's really in the next phase of construction that we'll have whoever gets the overall park contract kind of doing installation on that piece.
Okay.
But there will be a lot of kind of site verification and things like that.
Manager Olson?
So as you salvage that wood, the debarking and the prepping and the smoothing of the wood is later. It's not.
Manager Olson, the trees actually will not be debarked. My understanding is they hold up better with the bark left on. So while it'll kind of wear off over time,
Okay.
it's really more about kind of that detail level cutting.
Okay.
I have one last question, which I forgot to ask Ms. Quinn, and that is all the wetland restoration we talked about with a permit within the proposed easement area that will come stay with us?
President White, there is a portion along the shoreline that we're doing vegetation restoration that isn't in the easement, but it will be sort of brought into the easement under that maintenance plan.
Okay.
So anywhere that we're investing is being brought into the easement, but in some areas it's more in that sort of maintenance capacity than in the overall easement that's sort of protective.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question,
Manager Olson?
Attorney?
Miller.
The easement under a management plan, has it got the same power as a assignment under a regular land easement?
Madam President, Manager Miller, I understand your question to be is the addition of a management plan somehow encumber the district's property interests further? Is that your question?
I'm wondering if it's got the same power, if we, just a regular easement versus mentioned in a management plan.
Mr. Whisker, you have a thought?
Madam President, Manager Miller, what I understand is there is a reference in the management plan to this easement, but separately, the easement will also be approved and recorded, the same as any other easement, and that's an action that'll come before you on January 9th. Does that answer your question?
But part of of our interests are outside of the recorded easement, but are covered under the management plan. Does that have the same power?
Manager Miller, if I may, the modified easement will encompass those natural areas.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Did you have any further?
The answer is yes.
Just how far you screw it down.
Yeah.
It's the torque, it's the
Yeah,
torque.
yeah.
Anything else for Ms. Brown? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry.
Any opposed?
Did we hear from the resident before we voted? Or no?
Would you like to speak?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I like Anna.
Oh.
Nice.
All right.
Manager Olson?
Could I ask the neighbor where you are in reference to the park?
Yeah, do have the map, but I'm house number 2. I'm lot number 2. That's right, it butts up to the road.
Right
There.
here, right?
That's
Okay.
one.
Okay.
That one over. Yep, that's me right there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
All right. And we voted, yes, we're good. Thank you.
Did we?
Well, we got to the,
I know, I stopped.
I'll do it again.
Aye.
Those in favor say aye.
aye.
Any opposed? Now we know for sure.
Sorry.
That's okay, not a problem. Resolution 19-107, Ms. LeBeau, approval of CAC appointments. Did Mr. Saldet stay? No.
It's red, is it on?
Green is on for that one. Those are red. We'd like to keep it interesting.
President White, Board of Managers, the action before you today is the appointment of the 2020 Citizen Advisory Committee members. By statute, the board is required to annually appoint members to the CAC. And I have served as the liaison to this committee since June. And the district has had a very good working relationship with the Citizens Advisory Committee, and they play an important role in terms of advising the district on important strategic initiatives such as our responsive program, permitting, and our communications education program realignment. We have 9 existing Citizen Advisory Committee members who are seeking reappointment. The list of those members is in the RBA, as well as which city they live in. I do want to point out that while Peter Reichelbacher is listed as living in Long Lake, that's his mailing address, and his home is actually within the city limits of Medina. To give you an understanding of the geographic spread of the current CAC members, we have 3 new people who are applying to serve on the CAC. They are from Minneapolis, St. Louis Park, and the city of Hopkins. All of the applicants meet the qualifications and criteria for serving on the Citizen Advisory Committee. So with that, I will pause for any questions.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 19-107?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Loftus, are there any questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Resolution 19-108, Ms. Cermak, water quality lab analysis.
All right, President White, Board of Managers, I'm here tonight to award the water quality lab analysis contract for 2020 and 2021. As you noted in your packet, staff is recommending PACE Analytics, which is a departure from our current vendor. So we thought it'd be helpful to walk the board through our rationale behind that decision. I'm going to briefly go over the quote process we followed. I'll tick through the metrics we use to evaluate the proposals, and then we'll wrap up with staff's recommendation. So board authorized staff to solicit quotes at the November 7th meeting. Shortly after, we did post the quote package on the website, along with sending the quote package to 3 local certified labs. That quote package primarily includes this table here on the right, which is R&M's 2019 or 2020 projected analysis needs. And so we asked labs to supply us with a cost for that amount of samples, along with answering kind of a laundry list of questions about sampling logistics. We did receive 3 proposals. Those were the same 3 labs that we had directly reached out to. We saw just about a $20,000 range. RMB is our current lab. PACE, our recommended lab tonight, did fall at the top of the range. But we believe that added cost is worth it because of the added services they provide, which I'm going to go through in more detail. So this is kind of the full list of metrics that we use to review the 3 proposals. The first 6 in black are really pretty straightforward, kind of did you meet this or not. So I'm really going to touch on the ones in red where we started to see a big variance and saw PACE really set themselves apart from the other two labs. As we know, the district is pretty heavily investing in our IT planning efforts right now. R&M has spent a lot of time to outline the data processes that we go through to get from when we collect data in the field to getting it into our whiskey database. There's a lot that happens in that little red line, so we wanted to look at our labs through the IT lens and see if there was a way that the labs could better fit into that process and could they enhance that process. PACE has really stood out in this metric. They offer an online data portal, which the other two do not. This is going to allow staff to, at any time, check the status of our samples. And more importantly, we'll be able to set up our system to automatically pull data from this online portal and get it kind of automatically starting the processing and formatting into our whiskey database system. So it's going to decrease the amount of human error as well as keeping our whiskey database as kind of current and live as possible. And when we keep whiskey up to date, we're also keeping our GIS layers up to date so that all staff have access for data analysis, project ID, communicating stories to the public using the most up-to-date information. The other metric we looked at was hours of operation. Another big initiative we're carrying forward in 2020 is our real-time sensor network. The board was briefed on this in committee in October, and really the overall goal of this network is to kind of greatly increase the amount of real-time level and flow information that we're collecting across the watershed. And along with that, we're also going to be implementing a lot of storm sampler collections. And right now in 2019, we had about 4 to 5 of these storm samplers operational, and we were already finding ourselves a little bit limited by our current lab's time availability. And to kind of further illustrate that, so certain parameters have really short holding time. So dissolved phosphorus is one of those really common parameters that we always want to run, but it needs to be submitted within 48 hours. And so because of our current lab's hours of operation and location of the analysis, we can actually only submit samples for storms that occur Sunday night through Thursday morning, so that chunk in blue. So right off the bat, we're already limiting ourselves half the time. But as we all know or think, storms love to come at night and on the weekends. So we thought, let's take a look at that and see if that's actually true. And sure enough, for 2019, that really was the case. That chunk in blue is the percentage of storms that we actually were able to sample this year. This is showing all storms over 1/4 inch. Just an example. Of course, we wouldn't sample all of the storms, but it kind of shows you how important it is to have that full flexibility and full availability. PACE was the only lab that was open 6 days a week, and because of their local location in Minneapolis, we actually can hit those holding times with storms from any day of the week. And of course, if all of the metrics were the same, we'd be here tonight recommending the low quote option, but that wasn't the case here. And really for the first time, we're looking at metrics beyond baseline metrics. Just as an example, 2 years ago when we contracted with our current lab, we didn't need to look at hours of operation. We had one storm sampler out, and James kind of primed the pump in during committee, but R&M has gone through a lot of change in 2 years. We have greatly shifted our priorities. We have invested in IT, which has changed our workflow drastically, and we want to be able to fully utilize that investment, fully maximize it. And we really believe that these two metrics have a lot of value, and PACE truly does support those metrics the best and will carry our initiatives forward. So with that, staff is recommending PACE Analytics for the contract for 2020 and 2021.
Thank you, Ms. Cermak. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 19-108?
So moved.
Manager Robbins, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Loftus. Any questions for Ms. Cermak? Manager Olson?
Great use of the future. This is outstanding because we are making big changes, and now your standards are completely different than what we had been doing. So kudos for
Thank you.
careful analysis.
Can I
Manager
just
Miller.
ask this question? I looked at at the map where the different stations were and stuff. What do we have with, is it the USGS? GA or the county or what over in, by, in Carver County at that site we own at Mud Lake? What?
Manager Miller, managers, that is one of our Mesonet stations.
Your what station?
Mesonet, I believe you're referring to, which
Yeah.
is one of our kind of weather precip gauge.
Okay. Is that the only
Stations.
site we've got?
No.
Okay.
We have, I don't know. I know, what's the exact number of Mesonet stations we have?
There are only 2 on our properties.
Okay. Only 2 on our properties, but we have more than that within the watershed district boundaries.
In partnership with Hennepin County.
Yeah, is that information tied into that,
Into the sensor network?
yeah,
All of this information will be kind of compiled together when we go to make modeling decisions, dam operation
Okay.
decisions. It's all kind of working together, yes.
fascinating.
It is. Anything else? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. One of those victories I talked about, right? Resolution 19-109, Ms. Dogmagic, authorization to release an RFP for campus improvements here.
Good evening, President White, managers. Tonight, staff is looking for authorization to release a request for proposals for design services related to the campus improvements here at the Watershed District offices. It's been a few months since we talked about improvements to the district campus, so I'd like to first just provide a bit of a site history related to development of the site under a planned unit development agreement with the City of Minnetonka with the original developer. And some site history since the Watershed District actually moved into the building in 2012. Some recent improvements that we've made to the district campus and associated costs. The current condition of the campus and sort of issues associated with the condition. How those issues have led staff to work initially with WINC to develop a concept plan to look at various improvements for the site itself. And how those improvements and that concept plan have informed the 2020 budget. How those improvements might affect future maintenance of the campus generally, and then ongoing collaboration with both the City of Minnetonka and our neighbor to the west, Campbell CV, for this work and the planned improvements. And then the action before you this evening is that, again, to authorize release of a request for proposal for the design services, and then the proposed next steps and timeline. A bit of site history. In 1986, the property was developed by Westdale Properties. 2 parcels for office buildings, the district office and then Campbell CV next door, Westdale Florist, and then the child care facility down the road a bit. The 1986 PUD agreement with the City of Minnetonka was primarily taken care of with the original development of the site. There are 2 pieces of the PUD that do affect our new campus improvements, and those will be an architectural treatment that is employed across each building. So, and if we add any buildings or structures to the site, then those have to have that same architectural treatment. And then that would affect then the construction of a refuse container enclosure, which is required by the PUD. In 2012, the Watershed District purchased the property, and initially staff recognized that the site had pretty poor stormwater management, a limited parking availability, and also a lack of green space. And so in 2013, district staff worked with contracted with Bar Engineering to design site improvements. And those site improvements included with some goals of managing runoff from the site, installing landscaping and stormwater treatment practices to create a demonstration site on the campus, and then development and fabrication of a multi-purpose sign, as well as demonstration wetland restorations, water cisterns, pervious pavers. So the design itself got to be quite extensive. We got to about the 60% design phase with Bar Engineering and had an engineer's construction estimate of about $620,000 and design and construction oversight costs of $125,000. So at that time in 2014, when we got to that 60% design phase, the board opted to defer design plans based on budget and the design direction being quite extensive. And so between 2014 and 2019, the board has instead opted to direct staff to implement smaller discrete improvements, including a 2017 native planting on the boulevard next to Minnetonka Boulevard that was staff-led, as well as a number of smaller improvements and just a general maintenance of the campus itself. And this is sort of a general overview of what we typically spend annually to maintain the campus. The wetland buffer to the north of the building is maintained at about $1,200 per year. Landscape services, including snow removal, is about $3,500 a year. We rent a storage unit off-site to store a lot of our water quality monitoring equipment, stop logs, that sort of thing, at a cost of about $2,800 a year. The asphalt needs to be patched in the parking lot about every 3 to 4 years, which is about $1,250 each year. And that one-time cost to implement the planting on this boulevard was a one-time cost of $4,300. So just the annual cost with those top items are about $7,900. I'll return to this slide in a little bit to show how the campus improvements might reduce some of these costs. Here is an aerial photo from 2018, and the patching of the parking lot was pretty fresh at that time. So you can see the parking lot and the drive aisle between Campbell CV and the Water District office. It's pretty extensively patched and has been several times over the last several years. I'd like to now just kind of step through what we're sort of seeing as condition issues on the campus to sort of lay out how we might address some of those issues. First, as I mentioned, the parking lot and the shared drive with Campbell CV is in pretty poor condition. There's also inadequate parking on the site. Here is an image just from yesterday of the shared drive between Campbell CV and Watershed District, and while you can't see the surface of the bituminous, there are quite a few cracks and potholes that have been patched over time. And the adequacy of parking is certainly an issue as well. When we hold an office meeting with outside visitors, parking is at a premium, and we end up having to kind of shuffle cars around, parking next door at Campbell CV with their permission, or parking down at the Minnetonka Ice Rink and having staff shuttle down to the office. So there's certainly an issue with parking not being adequate. The next issue I'd like to point out is related to the parking lot condition, and that's the drainage and stormwater management on site. Currently, there is one stormwater treatment feature on site, and that is the small retention basin on the north end of the site, where there are two curb cuts that enter from the parking lot, where all the drainage from the parking lot and driveway enter. And that is the sole element of stormwater management on site. And that is in pretty poor disrepair. It has some invasive species that we've been managing, but then the curb cuts as well are not fully effective in draining the amount of water that comes off of the parking lot and the driveway as well. I'd like to touch on also the condition of the accessible parking stalls. There's an accessible parking stall on the north lot as well as the south lot. The one especially on the north lot is in pretty poor condition. The one on the south lot has a pretty significant cant to it. It does angle towards the driveway, which makes using it, if you have accessibility issues, pretty challenging. It's something we'd like to address as well. Another issue related to safety and entering and leaving the building is the way that the concrete pads have heaved at the rear entrance doors. There has been some repair work to make sure that those are set lower so that we don't have that frost heaving. But I think the real issue is that the base material needs to be corrected there. And then the drainage that comes off the two downspouts on the north end of the building needs to be corrected as well, so we're not having ice coming across. I'm sure everyone's experienced shuffling across the ice on the stoops, so something we'd like to address as well. Another issue that we're noticing becoming more and more of a problem as we have more materials to store, more equipment to be using on site is our on-site storage. Currently, we have some materials stored just right outside the building on the concrete pad there. We're using some space at the City of Minnetonka's Public Works facility to store our stop logs and other materials. We also currently have an off-site commercial storage unit at Public Storage, which we rent to store materials. So the off-site storage is certainly an expense and logistics issue as well. And then finally, I mentioned the city's PUD, the Planning and Development Agreement, does require our refuse containers to be enclosed. They're currently just exposed to the elements and just sit at the end of the parking lot. So with this work, we'd like to look at providing some sort of enclosure for those as well. As I mentioned, we initially worked with WANC to develop a series of concept plans, some tiered concept plans that would help inform the 2020 budget, give us an idea of what we might spend to address these significant issues. And so WANC developed these 3 tiers. The base plan initially looked at reconstructing the parking lot and drive, which would increase the parking by 2 spots. We'd just like to meet stormwater requirements, improve drainage on the site, and again, build the dumpster enclosure. That total cost was $307,625. And then WANC also developed a more comprehensive plan, which is shown here. The more comprehensive plan reconstructs the parking lot and shared drive like the base plan would. It increases parking by 7 spots by reducing the turf area on the west side of the building, as well as converting some of the parking spaces to compact-only spaces. So we gain 7 spaces there. We also exceed stormwater management requirements by increasing the filtration basin to the north of the site, converting it to an infiltration basin with an outlet, as well as doing a buffer enhancement planting along the wetland edge on the north of the site, as well as converting the turf area to the west, the remaining turf area to a native prairie planting. So then that would exceed our stormwater requirements. This plan also improves drainage throughout the site. Includes a dumpster enclosure as well, and also adds a storage shed, which would take up one of the parking places, but then provide enough storage for all of our materials to then come on site. A third concept plan was developed by WANC, a more advanced plan that investigated the expansion of the parking area to the north into that upland buffer. It just was found to be infeasible. The configuration of the parking is existing. It's just not feasible to expand it to the north there. So with that information in hand, the staff came to the July OPC, Operations and Improvements Committee meeting to lay out these plans, and the direction given by the OPC was then to pursue this more comprehensive site improvement plan, which informed the 2020 budget to have construction costs at about $414,000, which included both design for the work as well as contingency. And those costs are broken out that are below. I'll point out here that design costs are estimated to be about 10% of the total budget at about $36,000, as well as a pretty hefty contingency of $68,000. Primarily, we do on projects, including contingency, but more on the order of about 10%. The heavier contingency here, probably based on the fact that we knew we weren't going to be doing the work immediately. This was 2019 numbers for 2020 work, as well as that this work is, this budget is based on just a concept plan. It's not thoroughly vetted at this time. That $414,000 also includes the portion of the work that would be done on the Campbell CV property, which I'll touch on in just a moment. So getting back to the cost to manage the campus currently, we see some reduction in the overall cost to manage the site with these improvements. The buffer area would be pretty significantly restored. We'd be removing the biomass of some invasive plants and improving the buffer with new plantings, which would reduce maintenance costs over time. We're also going to be reducing turf area on the site, so less mowing. We'd have more native plantings that would require less maintenance, so that would be reduced as well. Our storage unit costs are about $2,800 a year, which would be eliminated, and the asphalt patching that we've been undertaking at about $1,250 every 3 to 4 years would be eliminated as well. So touching again on the planned unit development agreement with the city, we have been in coordination with the city as we've been developing these concept plans. And getting their input on how these plans would conform to the planned unit development agreement. And they've given us the go-ahead to move forward with the elements that we brought forward in the concept plan. I would like to review the landscape plan and the design for the dumpster enclosure as well. We've also talked to them about permitting requirements, and what we have proposed initially meets their stormwater requirements. They would permit the entire project under one grading permit, both on the district campus and as well as the Campbell CV campus. And then wetland protection rules would also be enforced, and We did have wetland delineation started with the 2012-2013 design work. That work was completed, the delineation was completed again this year. And we determined that the one question that we had was if the retention basin at the north of the site would be regulated as wetland, if we would be restricted from expanding that. The city has determined that that is an incidental wetland. It was actually probably excavated from existing upland, and so we are able to expand that for greater stormwater treatment. I'd like to touch a little bit on our coordination with Campbell CV, our neighbor to the west. This is a Hennepin County aerial that shows the property lines and shows that the property line really does cut right down the middle of the driveway between the district office and the Campbell CV office. And so knowing that, we knew that when we did any sort of campus improvements or repair work to the driveway, that we would have to have the coordination of Campbell CV. We've met with them a couple times. They're really amenable to all the work that we're doing on our site and would like to participate in the work. They agree that the shared driveway is in really poor condition, that they believe that total replacement is the best option and not patching. As I mentioned, the total $414,000 budget includes work that would cover the Campbell CV portion, but Campbell CV is interested in contributing financially. They are concerned about the initial cost estimate of $24,000 for their work. And so what we propose to do is in future bid documents to structure the Campbell CV work as a range of bid alternates so that we could do essentially a cut down the middle, saw cut the bituminous right down the middle, not do any work on the Campbell CV property. The second option would be just to do a mill and overlay on their portion, which would be the less cost. And the third option would be to do a total replacement. And they would definitely prefer to do the total replacement, but want to look at costs and have kind of a full picture of that before they agree to that, which then that work would be included in the future cooperative agreement. So the action actually before you tonight is the request for proposals. So I'd like to step through that quickly. The request for proposals is for design services. So we essentially would like to utilize the concept plans that we have in place now as a basis to advance the design and set a budget. And we'd like to look to a design team to creatively address the existing conditions on the site with these long-term goals of considering the space constraints on the site, that we are very much constrained to what is existing on the site, to think about using stormwater as an amenity, and to develop a cohesive landscape plan. Right now our landscaping is pretty disjunct. It's been improved sort of in stages, and so we'd like to have a more cohesive plan. We are able to use quite a bit of the information that was provided by Bar Engineering in 2013, including soil borings, some utility plans, and some drainage plans, so that work is not totally for naught. The request for proposals will ask the design team to improve the parking lot, expand the parking lot and the shared drive, think about stormwater management throughout the site creatively and exceeding those requirements, considering stormwater reuse, potentially a cistern or something along those lines, so that we could reuse stormwater on site if that was economically feasible. Again, an enclosure for our refuse containers, a storage garage so we can bring our materials on site, landscape improvements, improving the concrete at the entryways, and then possibly signage and other site features. So in the request for proposals, the scope of work includes a complete project design up to bid documents, any permitting assistance that we may need from our designer, bid document creation and bid support, as well as construction oversight. And we acknowledge that staff are certainly able and willing to provide construction oversight as well, as we have done on many of our projects. This timeline is a little bit loose at the moment, just kind of thinking about the holidays and how that might delay things. But ideally, we'd like to get the RFP out this coming Monday, and then hold a January 7th informational meeting so that we can get contractors in right after the holiday. And then take a look at proposals the week of January 20th, and then in early February interview our proposers, make a consultant recommendation at that time, and then either the first or second meeting in February, select a consultant and get contract approval for construction in summer or fall of 2020. And I can take any questions.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 19109? Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus, questions for Ms. Domjancic? Manager Miller? Manager Olson?
Question, I'm glad you talked to the neighbors on the west. What about the nursery on the east? Do they want to do anything?
We have not talked to them yet. We tried to keep the work pretty focused. The nursery parking lot is in poor condition as well, but we do recognize that we'll still need access in and out of the site. So we have, at this time, not talked to them, but certainly plan to as soon as we kind of have our ducks in a row.
Yeah, I just don't want them having hard feelings thinking, man, we could have really done something
Sure, absolutely.
while we're here.
Good question. Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Manager Miller?
This budget, can you go back to the budget?
Sure.
Is it, we're spending this on design?
Manager Miller, managers, no, this would be the total construction budget
Okay.
estimated from the
All right.
concept plans that Mike developed.
I was gonna quit the board and try to get that, try to get that contract.
We're estimating design cost to be at about 10% of the total project cost,
Okay.
which that's about $36,000.
When we bought this building, I think we paid a couple $1 million for it. You know, it was pretty modest, and we did, plus improvements after we purchased it. But we had a proposal that was quite expensive for doing the state-of-the-art and demonstration and all that, like several of the other watershed districts have done. And I think it's quite a bit of money they spent, let's just put it that way, that is demonstration, but I think most people can figure out how to store water, et cetera, without spending a lot of money. I really like this idea of treating the water and stuff and putting a new surface on and all that without going to the extremes, because, you know, we got a modest building and it works really well. And I don't think anybody's ever criticized us for purchasing this building and the improvements we made in it. But I want to make, I'd be real nervous if we were spending the kinds of money some of these other districts have done on their buildings in their campus. So I really appreciate the restraint you showed in developing this work plan and budget.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Omnianchich? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
The only thing that I would mention is, I mean, the CNS, if they do, we're live here, but if they do have a problem with it, maybe we can negotiate for some parking. At least in the driveway or something.
Do it right. Yeah, interesting.
Thank you very
Good
much.
idea.
We've added 11.5, vacation and sick leave for the administrators.
Madam President, I think managers received a memo I sent out earlier today. The question has arisen about the administration of the administrator's vacation and sick leave benefit. The specific question arises under his employment agreement, whether he is allowed to accrue vacation and sick leave hours in excess of what's allowed in the employee handbook. There are limits on how much can be carried forward for year to year generally. I've included and noted the specific provision of his employment agreement. My understanding is that he is allowed to accrue up to a total of combined vacation and sick leave hours of the 1,080. And so I've outlined that. We'd like clarification. One other question has arisen about whether it would be appropriate for administration purposes to set limits specifically on how much vacation can be carried over and how much sick leave, recognizing that total. I would say that that'd be a new negotiation with Mr. Whisker, and I think right now it's his discretion how to allocate those. But happy to answer any questions, and Ms. Reynolds is here as well.
Thank you. There is a suggested motion in the memo. Would someone move to confirm legal counsel's interpretation of the vacation?
So moved. Second.
Motion second. Any questions for Mr. Smith or anyone else? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Discussion of boundary change analysis. Ms. Christopher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, managers. So tonight, staff is just providing a brief update on the boundary analysis that's been completed for MCWD's boundary with 9 Mile Creek Watershed District. This originally came out of a request from Manager Miller to look at kind of the boundary with in the Grandview area in Edina. And then it was subsequently discussed at the September PPC as one of several planning analyses that the board would like staff to advance. We, since we'd be looking at the Grandview area, we went ahead and looked at the entire boundary with 9 Mile Creek Watershed District. If we were going to go through the process, we thought we might as well do the whole area. So just as a little bit of background or context, basically with improvements in geospatial technology as well as subdivision of parcels that happens over time, it allows us to align our legal boundary more closely with our hydrologic boundary. One of the big benefits of that being that it makes permitting easier. Currently, when a permit comes to us that is, where the boundary doesn't match, we usually, reach out to the neighboring watershed district and have to kind of work through who's going to permit this, how are we going to handle it. So obviously, if the two align, that becomes a lot simpler. We have recently undergone boundary adjustments with both Carver County WMO and Riley Purgatory Beth Creek Watershed District. I believe those were both in 2017. And I'll show the map shortly, but for 9 Mile, it would be crossing through the cities of Minnetonka, Hopkins, and Edina. So the analysis is fairly straightforward. We used GIS, or Geographic Information System, mapping program to determine the percent of each parcel that lies within either MCWD or 9 Mile, and then parcels are assigned to whichever has greater than half the land area. This is typically at least the starting point, unless there's a reason to diverge from that. So the resulting map was in your packet, and the areas in red would be switching to 9 Mile, areas in green would be switching to MCWD. And in most cases, the areas that would be switching are single-family home, low-density residential. The Grandview area is, let me pull up my laser pointer. The area in green here, which includes a number of commercial parcels that could present opportunities in the future should those redevelop partnership opportunities. But like I said, most of the areas are single-family home. So this is just a summary of kind of the stats. Number of parcels that would be switching to 9 Mile are shown on the top. Those switching to Minnehaha Creek are under that. And then we've included kind of the current totals just for context. The net change is that there would be a net increase of land area going to 9 Mile, about 276 acres, or 805 parcels. And we've included the estimated market value there as well, which you can see as a percentage of our total is a fraction of a percent. So pretty small net change overall. The process to go through a boundary change is fairly simple. There's actually a couple different processes that can be followed, but the one that we've done previously, and that's kind of the most straightforward, is basically shown here. It's under 103B 215. Basically, the process is initiated through petition to Bowser. And we would first request resolutions of support from 9 Mile, the 3 affected cities. Send that off. Bowser publishes a notice to see if any public hearing is requested. If not, they act on the petition. So, pretty simple process. So next steps, assuming that the board still wants to move forward, is that we would review the proposed boundary changes with the affected jurisdictions, see if there's any adjustments needed, any reason to diverge from that kind of straight 50% assignment, and then from there we would initiate the process through requesting those resolutions. So I can take any questions.
Are there questions for Ms. Christopher?
Question.
Manager Olson?
Could you please go back to the tax
Yes.
base? Thank you. Wow, that's amazing. Pretty even trade. Thank you.
We're losing 300 million?
376 million.
Well, that's market value, yeah.
Taxable
That's
market
market-
value.
Yeah. I said, as a, it sounds like a big number that way, but as a percentage, it's fairly small.
Go ahead.
Maybe we could get a
Copy.
few parking spaces in exchange.
Yeah. The copy that I got was black and white, so the red and green didn't work out too well. And I'm a little confused on the area in Grandview, north of Vernon, that wasn't in the watershed district? The residential properties? Because about 37 acres drains through my yard out of that. And, you know, it's been big damage from over the years. And Mike Panzer, you know, 25 years ago said it was in the district. Because we did a study on the thing. In the city oversized the sewers and everything else to accommodate, because everything north of Interlochen Boulevard there is, or south of Interlochen Boulevard, flows about 30 or 40 feet difference into my yard. So I'm just wondering how, you know, have we got a pretty scientific knowledge now of where the flows actually go?
Yes, well, so, I'm sorry, I don't know if I know which is Vernon here on the map without,
You're talking about the big green one where the highlighter is.
yeah, is this?
Yeah.
So yeah, the black line is the current boundary, so anything north of that is already in our legal and hydrologic.
That's funny. Because it's straight downhill. There's no doubt about where the water's flowing.
So,
Right, so that's already in our, so
No,
both,
it's not.
both our legal and
It's
hydrologic.
outside currently.
so that
But
green
I'm just,
triangle,
the reason for my question is I don't, you know, I want to make sure this is all science-based and not observation or something like that. Because, you know, I'm looking at where I know where the water's actually flowing, it's stepping in it.
Sure. Yeah, Manager Miller, we can certainly double check and kind of confer with you too to make sure I understand what area you're looking at. But yeah, the analysis we did was based on looking at storm sewer data as well as topography. But we can certainly double check.
And Mike used to always say that near the Southdale area, on the south of 62, but west of Southdale, that actually flows north. So I don't think this is accurate. Go ahead.
There is a connection, I guess, based on this analysis, that there is overflow that goes to the district south there. So you are correct, and that's probably something we'll look to evaluate with staff, is just how those get allocated and how those watershed boundaries get laid out. But I know that's been a topic that's been brought up.
It's not continuous, it's an overflow.
Yeah,
So it's a high water condition when the flow splits north into the district. But, if I might.
Yes, Mr. Whisker.
President White, Manager Miller, managers, this is an initial desktop screening to show you, this is the rough order of magnitude for changes, impact for tax, which is what the board asked for, that preliminary screening. It's based on stormwater and topo. And then just bringing back to you, these are the processes that we'd go through to advance this. With all of our boundary changes, this is where you start, and then you're gonna be getting together with the other watersheds and cities and engineer, and in each one of these areas, you're blowing them up and looking at parcel allocations and really getting granular about it. So this, I don't want you to leave with the impression that this is a final map, and that's what would be moving forward through a boundary adjustment. This is the preliminary scan based on the GIS data we have for storm sewer and topography.
Okay. Mike?
Manager Loftus.
I support making logical swaps where it's just kind of obvious, but I don't support just a broad brush change unless it's a little more equitable. I mean, I think there's some properties you probably think we just have to switch these, but I think there's quite a bit of a difference in parcel number and value number. So if there were some that weren't as clear cut, I'm not sure why we'd change those just for the sake of change. I guess that's where I'd fall out on it. If it were more equitable and certain ones made sense, I'd be fine with those, but I don't know, we'd have to have good reasons for it to be an extra 500 some parcels at 376 million. I mean, unless there's that many that are just super logical changes, but it doesn't sound like there's that much analysis that has gone into it yet.
Manager Loftus, managers, I mean, I think it's logical in that it would match the hydrologic and what actually drains to the resources that we're managing, and so, but that's just kind of typically the procedure that's been used, is looking strictly at where does the water flow, and if it's more than half the parcel, then it's reassigned. And so in the past, these were all parts of, one big parcel, and so you couldn't delineate it as accurately as you can today based on actual drainage. Like I said, that has the benefit of kind of relieving some regulatory headaches when things do develop in those areas, and there's kind of the question of who should actually permit it. But that's certainly the board's decision.
But the changes we've made before have just, we've looked at where the water flows and made a decision that way.
Correct.
Well, if I can. There's some that you're turning over that there's no flowage out of. Along Interlochen Boulevard, there's no flow to the south. There's no, it's by Interlochen Golf Course and that. It's just, they're just wetlands in the middle of the neighborhood that it flows to. So I don't know what the justification would be to assign it to somebody else. It's not flowing to a creek or a lake or anything. It's just in the neighborhood. It stays there.
I guess they can't picture it.
I don't know. I'm not trying to be scientific about it. I'm just long-time observer, I guess.
So you're not arguing about whether you'd like to have something or not like to have it, but just where you see the water moving?
Well, I don't see giving up tax base and jurisdiction when there's nothing going to happen. No one else is. The other watershed district isn't going to do anything. They don't have to do anything. It's not. There's no improvements needed. It's not flooding anybody, and it's and there's no flowage. It just, like Grandview, half of it, the commercial part flows under the highway into the creek. And the residential part flows down the hill through my yard into the,
To Meadowbrook.
into Meadowbrook.
Yeah.
Mr. Whisker?
Would the board be interested in bringing this back and doing a deeper dive segment by segment?
Yeah.
In committee to look at it? I'm not, we can ground truth some of your questions offline if you want to.
No, I think it's worth, it's a policy issue, I think, you know, like Grandview, there's huge proposals for civic and private development in that area that they've been talking about for years, and it's gonna affect us, a lot of more additional flowage. But the other areas, you know, I don't see any here nor there.
I don't know any of them well enough to have personal observations, so. So to Mr. Whisker's question.
I'd like to see it in
More
committee.
detail?
Yeah.
Is that okay with everybody?
Mhm.
Okay, a little more detail in committee. Thank you very much for putting this together, Ms. Christopher. Ms. Jonley and Mr. Heyman are here with the Preserve Boardwalk update.
For safety in numbers?
Always.
Manager Hedgemati, we were out there looking at the spray paint on the boards during your orientation tour.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah.
You were. President White, fellow managers, tonight we're bringing discussion item 12.2, the Minnehaha Preserve Boardwalk update. This is our outline for the evening. First, I'll provide an update on the interim maintenance protocol, and then a current condition of the boardwalk update. And then next, Mike will present materials investigation process and bring us up to date on that investigation. And then we'll cover next steps lastly. So just to refresh your memory, as President White just did, there's those lovely spray painted boards. So as part of the interim maintenance protocol that the board adopted on November 7th in response to the deteriorating condition, we've continued to do bi-weekly inspections and marking of failed boards. The last time that was done was early November, and then the last replacements for the season have been done on November 8th, and those boards were actually removed. Blackstone provided them to Wheeler, who then sent them to Lonza in Georgia for testing. Currently, the boardwalk is totally snow and ice covered, very compacted. It's still being really regularly used. And having been out there multiple times now under this condition, I mean, it's tough to say what the risk is, but it doesn't feel any riskier than it did before just because everything's so solid and frozen. And as we're not sure what the conditions will be as it continues to be frozen such as that, we are considering closing the boardwalk if conditions warrant. But at this time, it doesn't really necessarily seem like it needs to happen.
Yeah, President White, manager, so I'll sort of take over from here with regard to the material investigation process that we've been leading and some of the coordination that we've conducted. We've taken a very metered approach to the process due to the complexity and based on the evidence that we have to date, and also the fact that we're sort of dealing with something post-construction, yet still with a contractual matter to it. So after review and careful consideration that we were ensuring that the public was safely using the boardwalk, not that there was any public health or public safety concerns, and that we were managing and conducting this interim maintenance protocol at an effective level, we started sort of looking at the 3 steps that I've outlined here in terms of what is actually part of the construction contract and what might be the most logical direction that we would go. Based on the clear degradation of the material, it seemed as though the main bullet points that were under consideration at the front end anyway are bullet points 1 and 3, which is that we obviously have materials that are not defective, and that we have documentation that ensures that quality control was maintained throughout the manufacturing or treatment of the material. It also gets a little bit complicated because there were a lot of consultants involved in the process early on because of the scope of the project. So we had a stream restoration and an engineer associated with that, an interfluve, a trail project with HR Green, and then a variety of other sort of secondary consultants who would provide structural analysis or ensuring that the helical piers were being screwed to the appropriate depths, things of that nature. And then from there, that covers the design component. You then have the contract and the supply component, which is the direction we've opted to go because of the defective nature of the material to date in working with Blackstone as the contractor who is under contract with the district, and their associated subcontractors, which is Wheeler as the supplier, or as they sort of clarified for us, the broker of the material. Peterson Lumber is the actual company who treated the material in Wisconsin, and then Lonza is the chemical company who provided the chemical and what they sort of call the recipe for what treatment is required within the wood. And so I'll just remind the board that as part of this, we learned that the standard used in 2013-2014, which was that the use of lumber material in a boardwalk situation such as this that's not in ground contact was to conform to what's known as a UC 3B, so above ground contact. Since then, in 2017, the American Wood Products Association actually changed that to all boardwalk materials should have a ground contact UC4B. So we don't have that designation, but we also did design and comply with the standard at the time. So as it relates to the specifications themselves, those are in order, or they were at least designed in order. Excuse me, in order. There are still questions to be had with the designer to ensure that. So I just sort of laid out for you the potential causes of the problem. I won't tick through each one, but just to give you an example of where the designer, the contractor, or construction oversight might come into play, depending on what's going on with this particular structure. There's also the 6th bullet, which is in our contracts often listed as act of God or unforeseeable conditions. And so we have had a very wet 7 years. One could implore us to explore whether or not that had an impact on the ability of this material to maintain its longevity over the period of time we're talking. But in all conversations with the supplier and contractor, that isn't something that they would necessarily expect. The way that the material has performed is clearly defective in their mind, and so we've focused on, again, that 3rd bullet, which is just a failure of the material to meet the specs set forth. Whether did it meet the specs or it was just defective from the onset is something that we're trying to figure out. And so trying to tick through the questions over the last couple of months as to whether or not the durability was represented to the district accurately in the design, or was and that the spec was adequate, or was the material an actual cause of the issue. So with the materials investigation, focusing on the defective nature of the material, we worked directly with Blackstone and Wheeler starting in September, and then visited the site in October with those representatives. And the representative from Wheeler, Mr. Clemens, noted that he had never seen anything like this, and that in fact it appeared as though the material was rotting from the inside, which wouldn't necessarily even indicate that it wasn't treated, because they've seen wood without treatment have a longer life expectancy. So that throws a little bit of an issue within the complexity of the problem, is that whether or not it was treated may not be an issue. Maybe it was a lumber supply to begin with, or some other deformity. So that's something that we are, searching along with. We've contacted Wheeler about reaching out to the lumber supplier themselves. Regardless, following that meeting, they agreed to have Lonza, the chemical manufacturer, come out and take a look at the site. And that's actually because they first reach out to the lumber supplier, who immediately says, well, we perform to the standards of the recipe. You need to talk to the chemical supplier. The chemical supplier from Georgia did come and visit the site. Then when Blackstone replaced the boards, they had requested to actually test some of those. Those were shipped to the lab in Georgia, and after weekly pressuring from the district, because we hadn't heard any of the results, we did finally receive a letter from them yesterday, and it essentially didn't say anything, which is a bit of our frustration. It said that You used a board that is no longer the standard in this condition. You should have used the UC4B. That would have been better. There's moisture in the area, and sometimes it touches vegetation, so maybe that's the problem. We could certainly supply you with better wood if you'd like. So we did discuss with Wheeler today that the investigation and the testing didn't meet the intent of what was promised. We were supposed to understand whether the treatment, the preservative, was even present in the lumber, to what retention it was there, and had it penetrated the material, which is something they had said they could actually test for. So we don't have that. We did talk to Wheeler then today. They've assured us that they want to help us to the best of their ability, but as the broker, they don't have any real leverage. And furthermore, our contract is actually with the contractor being Blackstone. So with that, that sort of gets you up to speed where we are today, and the next steps that we're sort of considering, or what we're bringing forth to the board tonight, just to let you know what we're going to continue, what path we're going to continue down. Of course, we'll consider closing the boardwalk if conditions warrant. As of right now, it doesn't appear to be an issue, and we've actually maintained the boardwalk sufficiently throughout the year that it's still very safe and usable. So if repairs are needed, we can continue to do that. I spoke with legal counsel today, and that as long as from here forward we retain records of the replacement and actually hold the material, we would have no issue if some sort of agreement has come to in the future about what the replacement looks like and whose cost that is. We could easily recoup those costs. We're awaiting the additional tests from Lonza. We have requested those via Wheeler, that they actually send us the testing results, and sort of provided a bit of information to Wheeler today to let them know that we're going to likely conduct independent testing. We need to find an actual third-party lumber testing facility, which we haven't located yet. But to let them know that if they're going to withhold the actual test results, so it's sort of at their discretion whether or not they would like an independent review, or if they would like to just give us that information, and we can decide from there. In the meantime, aside from the independent testing that we're going to explore, we are going to formally notify H.R. Green as the engineer of record and Blackstone of our intent to seek a more formal resolution to this. They've both been notified, and we've been in contact with both since September, but a more formal notification and a need to lay out a more clear timeline in which we would expect resolution, particularly with the spring and sort of opening back up to users and moving into the summer tour and some of the other elements that are in the near future. So that's where we're at today with the investigation and where we stand, and we can continue to keep the board apprised of where this goes from here, whether it be in committee or other board updates such as this. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Green or Ms. Johnley? Are we paying for the boards, the new boards?
We have not been billed this year by Blackstone for any replacements yet.
Okay.
Whether or not.
Yeah, Chair White, managers. Technically, we are paying for that work to be done by Blackstone. It was initiated under sort of anticipated normal wear and tear. By the time we needed approximately the third set of replacements, we realized there was something greater going on here. And from that time forward, we've been talking about maintaining that record and determining what the costs are and how those may be allocated. So as a clean position at this point is from the final removal in November, and when we shipped those to Lonza, from there forward, all materials would be maintained and preserved for any testing or records, as well as any invoices if we are to receive those from Blackstone. We've also discussed, is there a need to, and we'll discuss this with council, at some point if this enters a more formal process, do we need to sort of divorce ourselves from Blackstone as the contractor conducting the work until a resolution, until we do find some sort of resolution. It would be unfortunate because they're very capable and do a great job as it relates to the work, but the materials that were installed were an issue. I should also note the materials that are being installed as part of the repair are the UC4B, so they are the ground contact materials. So the image that you saw in this presentation, they maintain the new treatment standards.
National?
Well, what's the cost of what was the original cost of the materials?
Manager Miller, managers, we've projected a cost if we were to replace the decking boards and the handrails, so it's not full replacement of the entire structure. It would be in the $200,000 to $250,000 range.
That's money. Anything else? Thank you for the update.
Thank you.
You know, I just want to comment. I think it's refreshing that when we have a problem like this, that it's discussed and brought to the board's attention so that it's not covered up and somebody else gets blamed for it later. And I appreciate it. I don't appreciate the problem, but I appreciate, knowing about it in an honest way.
Ms. Schaffler.
Madam Chair, managers, I want to just do a time check. I can certainly lay over this presentation. It's about 20 minutes. So if folks are interested, I can move ahead or the board's pleasure.
Let's continue.
Okay.
We won't meet for, 3 weeks? 4 weeks.
This is true. So let me pull it up here. President White managers, was it 2 weeks ago now? James Whisker, myself, along with President White and Manager Olson, were up at the Minnesota Association of Watershed Districts, and I had been invited up to present on the partnership that we've created with the National Weather Service, the USGS and Hennepin County around how we are predicting, measuring, managing, and communicating about water level impacts. And after that, both President White and Manager Olson thought it'd be useful for the full board to hear the presentation. And it's a good opportunity because I've also been invited to present in January and only have a 20-minute time slot, so I'm going to try to do a little slimmed down version for you tonight.
Dress rehearsal.
So, as water managers, we're tasked with managing the water budget across our watershed. And identifying a responsible party for tracking and managing a water budget is really the core reason why watershed districts exist. So, first, just grounding, you guys are familiar with our geography, but what's a useful context here is just how our watershed developed. So we developed from east to west. So as Minneapolis, the population of that city boomed in the 1950s after the World War II boom, and population began to shift west. And as that happened, residents living along the creek started to experience flooding problems shortly after this development happened. And in 1965, similar to what we experienced in this year, brought record precip to the Twin Cities with almost 40 inches of rain. So, which currently ranks as the third wettest. So 2019 is the first wettest, so a good comparable year. And this is what it looked like on the creek in 1965. So the picture on the left is severe flooding along the creek, and then the picture on the right is from the next year in 1966. There was some severe flooding along the creek due to ice jams that were forming under bridges. And the 1966 flooding was really due to the unregulated water coming out of Lake Minnetonka because the dam did not exist. And you can see, by 1966, residents along the creek were getting pretty frustrated. They had just gone 2 years back-to-back of flooding, and they petitioned the Hennepin County Board to have a flood district, a special district for flood control established. We came about the next year, 1967, and our first order of business was to build an adjustable structure at the outlet of Lake Minnetonka to try to regulate the amount of flow that was going into Minnetonka Creek. You guys all know where this is, but just trying to decipher between the upper watershed and the lower watershed and how the Grays Bay Dam fits into that. And in 1979, then, we built our very first project, which required extensive DNR, engineering analysis, and an over a decade-long public input process. And along with the dam itself, there also was a 202-foot emergency spillway constructed that allows water to flow out of the lake when the Lake Minnetonka reaches the elevation of 930. And the dam is really there to prevent the water from Lake Minnetonka from hitting Minnetonka Creek as the grid's draining. So trying to really be utilized as a storage basin. So you can
flow back water before rain event, and then allow the Minnehaha Creek to drain, and then allow the storm sewers to come in. So try to reduce the flashiness of the creek. In coming up with a plan to build the dam, like as I noted, took 10 years because it required extensive community input with all 29 of our communities, coordinating with the DNR and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And we operate this plan by following these different zones. This is, as you all know, is a very simplified version of the 12-page document, and it's based on the time of year, lake level, and capacity in the creek. And just as we are almost to the lake elevation at the moment, every year it requires that we draw the lake down to an elevation of 928.6 to create storage for the spring snowmelt. And flooding is something that often thrusts watershed districts into the spotlight. So it's because it's the perception of a lot of people that's what we're doing. And an example of this is we know from our recent communications and outreach analysis that flood stories gets us the most media stories, gets us the most mentions in those stories. It's the most well-received visit to our website, and it's the e-newsletter that gets the most openings. So, predicting how much rain is coming, how it's going to travel through the system, and what impacts it will have is what we need to do to manage the water budget. Understanding the quantity of the precipitation, how that system is impacted, is measuring, and then how we manage is really how to mitigate those effects before and after the precipitation hits. And in this case, our biggest management tool is the Grays Bay Dam. And then lastly, with communicating, trying to provide information to partners and residents to help them also predict, manage, and be informed about water level impacts. And as a water manager, the tools that we use to predict, measure, manage, and communicate about the water levels are based on stable precipitation patterns that we are familiar with that no longer really exist, especially for us since 2014. So this is a good snapshot of just how those precipitation patterns have changed. The DNR, I think in the next couple of weeks will officially go down as the wettest decade on record. And what is telling about this graphic is not only just the annual decade precip totals that are increasing, but it's the number of days with an inch or more of precipitation. So you can see here in the decade of 2010s, on average you're getting almost 8 days a year with an inch or more, whereas back in 1990s you were only getting 6 days. And you see that number is just at a steep incline. And another noteworthy statistic that the National Climate Assessment Report just came out with is you can have 10 of your rainiest days in a year can attribute almost 40% of your total precipitation. So at the Watershed District, we're aware that these heavy rains can pose special problems, and we became well aware of that in 2014. So I'm just going to recap quickly for the board what 2014 looked like. It was different from 2019 in that the first half of the year was very wet. We had almost the double amount of rain that we usually get. And June of that year really sealed the deal with over 11 inches of rain. So what that looked like was 82 days that we were not able to control the discharge out of Lake Minnetonka because the water started going over that emergency spillway. And for 82 days, there was also a no wake on Lake Minnetonka, and that also meant that Minnehaha Creek was out of its banks. We also know we made some records that year. Lake Minnetonka was an all-time high, beat its previous record by over 7 inches, which is significant for a lake of that size. And we know Minnehaha Creek actually exceeded the 100-year flow by over 30%. And this is just a visual from the air of what it looked like. As we all know, Methodist Hospital was significantly affected. And in this case, this picture of the loading dock, which was under water for 10 days and prevented them from loading critical supplies. So after this flood of record, MCW paused and considered
how can we take a more sophisticated approach and granular level understanding in order to make better management decisions around the Grays Bay Dam? So what we've done is we formed a partnership with the National Weather Service, the USGS, Hennepin County Emergency Management to more accurately predict what's coming, more specifically measure what does come, and more effectively respond and provide more useful information to our constituents. So now I'm going to walk through the tools. So the old way involved a static 7-day precipitation forecast. I'd come in, look at what the 7-day forecast was, make a decision. What we have now are tailored 7-day precipitation breakdowns specifically for the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. And within those seven days, we actually get 6-hour breakdowns of precipitation that's coming. So you now have a breakdown in 6-hour increments of what we can predict is going to happen over the next 7 days. The National Weather Service also then takes this detailed forecast information and puts it into one of their hydrologic tools. And what they do is they've created their own understanding and water budget for the entire lake area that drains into Lake Minnetonka. And then they've, on their website for us, they then provide these 2 different outputs. So they predict how much water is flowing into the lake. So that's pictured here on the left-hand side. That's the red line, and then the green line or blue line in that same graph is predicting how much we're letting out of the dam. So you can see if there's a big delta there, you can assume that the lake level is going to go up. So then the graph on the right is predicting how much that inflow will then cause the Lake Minnetonka level to jump, which that can then help us make decisions around, are we okay with the lake getting that high, or do we want to make some management decisions proactively ahead of a storm to create storage? So knowing this is really going to help us predict the peak and inform decisions around that management. The next thing is, once we had a grasp on a better predicting and having information on how much water was coming on, was we needed to know how much water actually fell on the system. And the old way of doing this was we relied on the airport gauge down at the MSP airport, and then a gauge actually not in the watershed down at the Chanhassen Weather Service. And you're trying to then just to apply this watershed wide. What we did after 2014 was we'd established a good working relationship with the Hennepin County Emergency Management and started talking about their interest in trying to establish this county-wide Hennepin West MESO network where they're trying to install weather stations every 5 miles. And as Manager Miller noted earlier in the evening, we have allowed Hennepin County to install 2 of these stations on our properties. Those are noted here as the St. Bonifacius one and then the Minnetrista site. So and then there's 7 total across our whole watershed district. So what this does is provide a much more granular level understanding of what actually fell across the watershed district, and we're not trying to make the assumption of what falls at Minneapolis also fell out in Orono or Minnetrista. And this is a really good example. If you just look at this map, this is an actual storm event that happened this past September, and you can see just down in Minneapolis you had 2.5 inches, and up in Hopkins you almost had 3.4 inches. So even within a couple miles, drastically different precipitation actual amounts that fell. So this helps us to better understand what the real-time response might be to the water bodies.
Can I ask a question? In 1987, the big flood, Hopkins had 11 inches of rain. And they're the most rain in this graph too. What is it about Hopkins that gets the rain like that?
I had 12 in Orono.
Is that right?
It's the cold air is coming into the city heat zone, and it's the transition point is right there. So you see a lot of, it's like a front.
Yeah, Manager Miller and Olson. Yeah, this year you see Plymouth got hit a lot this year pretty hard with some of those big storms too. So I don't know exactly. That seems like a logical possibility.
Okay, thanks.
So the next thing was we had a good sense of how to predict what's coming. We had the tools in place to measure how much rain fell. The next thing was how much what's the real-time response to the water bodies, and that's where the USGS comes into play. So we'd already had an established partnership with the USGS. The Minnehaha Creek gauge, which is located to the right here in purple, has been in place since 2006. But after the record flooding in 2014, we were talking with the USGS about installing a real-time gauge on Lake Minnetonka. And when we ran that by the broader partnership, the National Weather Service instantly identified how that could help them even enhance their tool better, because they would have 15-minute readings to feed into their predictions and forecasts for the Lake Minnetonka. So this is what we currently have in place for all of our real-time sensors. So again, the purple are the USGS stations, and then the green are those Hennepin County Mesonet networks. And this is the future. I know Kaylee just showed you the same map. And what next is implementing a series of real-time sensors across the watershed district, which is going to provide a more efficient and much more granular information about the water system. So now we'll have predict how much rain's coming. We'll have a real-time, minute-by-minute reading of how much the Hennepin weather stations are picking up. And then I don't know how often the future sensors are going to predict. But essentially, we're getting down to minutes and hours of predicting and measuring the real-time response. So this is going to allow us to go from 2 current real-time sensors to 23. And we're doing that in partnership with the county. And how this will help us inform dam management is the sites in the upper watershed are going to help us understand how much water is coming and how much water is going to fill up that Lake Minnetonka reservoir. And that'll help us inform how much water we should be letting out of the dam. And then having all these additional sites along Minnehaha Creek are going to allow us to have a better understanding how the creek's responding to real-time rain events and dam adjustments. And if we had them if they were installed in the past couple of weeks, they would have been really critical to help us with these ice jam issues that are currently happening on the creek and better predict those as well. So this is an image just to try to show how it all works together. So as you recall, managing the dam the old way was using a lot of static data points. One lake level reading, a 7-day forecast, and just kind of looking at the time of year that you're in. And operating the dam used to be pretty predictable. You'd have really wet springs, dry falls, and then obviously after 2014, we knew that not to be the case, and we haven't really had one of those normal years since. So now with this detailed information from our partners, we can really optimize the management of the dam to proactively create storage for the forecast precipitation. And what we've been able to do then is reduce dam discharge before big rain events and use Lake Minnetonka as storage, which then allows Minnehaha Creek to drain down and prevent flooding. And optimizing the timing of that storage in Lake Minnetonka provides one of the largest return on investments for downstream communities and improves the overall resilience of the system as we deal with our changing climate. And this is an important piece because Lake Minnetonka, being the 9th largest lake, has a really big obviously, surface area. And there's more storage on 1 inch of Lake Minnetonka than there is along the whole 22-mile stretch of Minnehaha Creek. So you can see why optimizing technology to really make sure that storage stays there and is optimized is really your biggest return on investment. So lastly, communicating out about all the information is important. So taking all of this rich context-specific information and helping getting out to our key audiences. So the old way we used to do this is we had a dam operations page similar to this, but it was missing that explanation tab. So it was just a date, a lake level reading, and a dam discharge, and people had to guess why we were making those decisions. What the partnership has allowed us to do is expand this information to provide a detailed explanation of why we're changing each dam operation. So I've highlighted in red here 2 examples of that, just trying to explain the bottom rectangle is saying, hey, there's 1 to 3 inches of rain coming. We're temporarily increasing the dam discharge to create storage on that lake. And then the next block up is saying we've actually lowered discharge to create storage on the creek for the predicted rain. So having that balance. A new thing that we started last year was these customized emails to people who opt in, which we send out when there's over a 1-inch rain or more predicted. And then we send the follow-up emails summarizing the precipitation event and the actual water level impacts. We also have started a Grays Bay Dam Twitter account. This shares updates and photos several times a week and has been also a useful way to inform people of what we're doing at the dam.
Only 3 retweets.
But 81 views. And these are some great, this is the swans, right? Yeah.
Yes. It's Photoshop.
They were out there. I was just out there yesterday, and there was a family of 6 as well.
Wow.
So just wanted to end with some partnership successes. So this cross-disciplinary partnership approach has given us tools to predict, measure, manage, and communicate the impacts of increasing rainfall, and identifying impacts to water bodies better than we ever have before. And this partnership has really helped to mitigate the effects of the historic rainfall. So in 2016, we had the second wettest year on record, and we didn't have any flooding on Lake Minnetonka or Minnehaha Creek. And then in 2017, we were able to really utilize those weather service prediction graphics to really draw down the lake ahead of large storm events and reduce discharges, and really made that operational. And then, if you all remember, in 2018, we had that awful April blizzard, which dropped, I think, 2 feet of snow on us. And having that 7-day forecast from the Weather Service, they predicted that. We saw it coming in water content. It was showing like 3 or 4 inches of water content. And we had said, holy cow, that's a lot of snow coming. So that prompted us to air at the dam and get that open ahead of ice out, which prevented spring flooding of that year. And then in 2019, having the partnership in place really facilitated the ability to just coordinate and have a series of discussions and meetings about how to approach this spring's flooding, and allowed us to then also run some hydrologic snowmelt models with inputs from the Weather Service and USGS. And then that helped us to, again, aerate the dam. And then this has obviously been a tough year, but I think it's been successful in that we have really limited the duration of high water despite a record-setting year. And I just wanted to also note that providing these high-value information is also really valuable to our partners and residents. And probably the biggest ways of measurement are how often are the phones ringing or emails coming in. And I think for myself and Jana, getting people past critics calling and actually complimenting us or saying you're making the right decisions is probably the biggest measure of success. So I'm just going to end with where we're going next. We're shooting for in 2020 to get those ResNet sensors installed. And then we are continuing our conversation with the USGS to see how that ResNet system might be used as a good test pilot for them as an agency. They're interested in getting more real-time gauges across their different focused areas and are curious to track that. And then we're trying to evaluate what additional planning technology is needed to help us just keep doing our jobs better, and trying to figure out what might have to happen at the Grays Bay Dam just to get that kind of upgraded into the 21st century. And then the Weather Service is also really interested about getting some flood warning points established along Minnehaha Creek. So once we get that ResNet sensor up and running, that'll provide them that data that they can need as well. And then lastly, having just, with 23 more sensors, you just have such more granular understanding of how the system's working, which will really be very helpful to inform where future projects might happen, whether that's the district leading or cities leading, to try to reduce those flooding impacts. And this is what I'll end with. We're already planning for spring flooding. This quote here is the best way of what the Weather Service is already putting out flood warnings, and it's only December. So imagine putting a soaking wet sponge in the freezer and then taking it out and trying to pour water on it. That's what they're predicting is going to happen this spring. So we're trying to game plan with our communities and are contemplating hosting kind of watershed-wide meeting maybe in January, just convening folks around. It's going to flood. We already have that information well in advance, so kind of who's doing what, and how we can work together. So with that, I can take any questions, and then I can provide just a real quick update on the current Minnehaha Creek ice jam status as well.
Are there questions? What did you have to drop out to bringing this down to 20 minutes?
Did I make it? Oh yeah, pretty close. You know, some of the just background stuff that you guys already know. I'm trying to think what else. I had some more images in there about just the dam operating plan itself and the nuances of that, but I don't think that's as critical to the story of what we're trying to tell. The purpose of the presentation at MOD and for the Climate Adaptation Conference is how can you make this applicable to other people, and how can these partnerships be kind of replicated? So not everyone has a dam, so that piece of it isn't necessarily relevant, so it's making all the other pieces relevant for them.
Questions? Well, thanks very much.
Yeah.
Now the update, right?
Yeah, so we've been coordinating with the City of Minneapolis, Minneapolis Park and Rec Board, and City of Edina. The challenges that have happened were the two sub-zero days last week. It caused a lot of ice to form on the creek, and then it warmed up, and then water started flowing. And because we've had such sustained high water levels all year, there's a lot of downed trees that the cities have been able to get to, so that ice is getting caught up. We've had a good coordination plan this spring for ice jams, which then provided a good foundation for that coordination to continue this winter. So the city's been great. They've been getting out there and taking care of those issues as they pop up. And then this weekend we have a game plan, just because it's supposed to warm up above 40, so might be some good flows in the creek and kind of who's doing what. And we are assuming that the lake will reach the drawdown elevation sometime this weekend, and are planning to officially close the dam on Monday. So if that does indeed happen, we'll send out one of those high water level email updates letting everybody know, and keep everybody informed that way.
That log got completely removed.
Manager, also most of it, there's a chunk that's just like too far in the creek, so once water levels subside more, they'll be comfortable getting in there once things freeze up a little bit more, but water's moving, and there is a little bit of water still on Forestdale Road, but it's inches, not kind of up to cars anymore.
Okay. That's scary.
Anything else? Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I think it's down to the administrator's report.
I just have a brief 25-minute update.
Typically will be your timekeeper.
So maybe in chronological order here, I think Andrew Olson and others already covered the MOD conference. So another updates last week as part of just ongoing functional connection, we try to make, strengthen, and enhance with University of Minnesota. Professor Gulliver, who's water resource faculty at the university, we hosted him and his class here. They'd chosen some Minnehaha Creek case studies, Long Lake subwatershed, and the work down in Minneapolis along the Parkway to do some hydrologic modeling on. They had the good fortune to come here and present to a packed house of staff that red teamed their presentations and gave them some good critiques on their approach and in terms of real life watershed management, but it was a good exchange of information. In the bracket of climate adaptation work, one of the things that we talked about at the board retreat as an interim action step that we'd be taking as staff is just continuing to network with the various state agencies, understand what direction they're going, the policies that they're setting, and then bringing that information back to the organization, back to the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District for context for our decision making. And some of that's been happening recently. We just met with leadership at the Environmental Quality Board. They're the coordinating agency at the state level that they write a 10-year plan, a 10-year water plan, which they're doing right now. And it's very specifically focused on climate. And so They have an interagency panel or team with Department of Natural Resources, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, those agencies where they're convening them and trying to find out what's happening in each of the state agencies with regards to policy and boil that down into a centralized water plan. And we were meeting with them because they have an interest in highlighting and profiling case studies that can be brought up to the state level to learn from, and whether it's the work that we've been doing to shed light on what's happening down in South Minneapolis or the information that Ms. Schaffler just presented. They were just very interested in both. Shortly after that, we met with DNR leadership, part of their CREST team, or CREST, I guess, the Climate Resilience and Climate Renewable Energy and Sustainability team, rather. They wanted to understand what we've been dealing with as a watershed and how we're managing water levels, and as well look at the case study of what we're dealing with in South Minneapolis. And that meeting was fairly well attended. Assistant Commissioner Shannon Lotthammer was there. She's the Assistant Commissioner for Forestry, Parks, Trails, and Operations. It's just a really good exchange of information where the DNR is actively reaching out and asking local units or regional units of government like us, what do we think we're going to need from the DNR in the future? And I think they're wrestling with a lot of the same issues we are in terms of what are their roles and responsibilities long term, and how do long-standing functions of public water permitting, setting OHWs, how are those going to be impacted or change as a result of unprecedented rain, and then looking even longer term at future drought cycles. And Kenny Blumenfeld, who's one of the keynotes at MAUD, the state climatologist, was on the call via Skype and weighed in. So again, a good exchange of ideas, and we're bringing that information back. And in 2020, as we start working with the Citizens Advisory Committee, picking up where the board left off, we'll give them the scan of what's happening at the state level, what's happening at the community level, and we're going to start those conversations with the CACs to start to map out the other steps that the watershed district might be able to take. And then, of course, Tiffany mentioned her January 22nd presentation at the Climate Adaptation Conference, which will also be attended by Hennepin County staff. We have some upcoming meetings. President White and I are scheduled on January 15th to meet with Commissioner Fernando as just part of our annual rounds with county commissioners. We had just touched base and reported previously with the Carver County commissioners, and so we're working on scheduling some others at Hennepin County, and we'll obviously report back and keep you informed on those connections. We also had hosted the Lake Minnetonka Conservation District leadership team, or leadership, for discussion this week. President White and I, we met with Greg Thomas, the president, who's Tonka Bay delegate, Ann Fulsher, who's the treasurer from Victoria, and then their executive director, Vicki Schlenning. After the last series of meetings that they'd had, the feedback that we've given you, the feedback that we've provided them in writing, they wanted to reach out, and I think they're making the rounds connecting with all of the different agencies to get a better sense of how they might be a more coordinating force in the world of AIS. So they're meeting with Three Rivers, Hennepin County. They met with us. I think the general frame of the discussion was just really, what do we do? They really wanted to know what's our strategic direction and how does that overlap with LMCD. So we talked a lot about Tiffany's work and water levels and how that plugs into No Wake and their alerts, how we're focused on treating the regional water that drains into the lake and how that's a benefit for the lake, and they should be aware of those upstream efforts and be able to communicate about those. And then we talked about the direction that we're going with aquatic invasive species and what that might mean for them in the future. I think in the end they seem to find value in the clarity of the conversation, and we'll see where they go with their planning process. I don't know if you had anything else to add there or weigh in.
Well, I think that we asked a lot of questions that might be helpful in focusing and defining what their multiple goals might be.
Right. Yeah, I think we just pushed again on what is it exactly that they're working to accomplish. Is it the harvesting evaluation master plan? Are they trying to coordinate everybody else's AIS or be sort of an information brokerage of everything that's happening around Lake Minnetonka and just relay information? And I think that they let us know that's something that they're still wrestling with and discussing and figuring out. And I think that's it. I just wanted to close by echoing President White's sentiments that it's been a great year. Feel lucky to be such a part of such a visionary and tight-knit team of board and staff, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays, thank you. We are adjourned.